So I'm with Laurence Bradley, who's Community Development Manager here at Ballybot House in Newry. Lawrence, could you just say a bit about how Ballybot House came into existence, because it's quite a substantial resource here.
Well, I suppose the first port of call for the whole thing was an idea around a one-stop shop for the community voluntary sector in the town and serving the bigger area of Newry and Mourne. So we had been using a number of premises and had a number of locations at a time around the town for ACE schemes and enterprise projects and for all sorts of volunteer projects as well. So the sort of notion was around for a long time that we would try and get one central place to locate ourselves. And I suppose the sort of notion really was that we'd try and get somewhere in the middle of the town. And at that time in the town there was a lot of space available through all of the whole trouble stuff.
What sort of time is this?
This is early 90s. I suppose it really started the whole sort of move towards getting a project going. And I suppose there were a number of similar ideas around SERS that were coming on board then through the IFA and projects like that. So it was sort of in the air, and there had been another couple of projects in the town who had done similar types of moves. So it wasn't really new, but it was something that we felt we needed to do at that time.
And could you just briefly take us through the process of the acquisition of the building?
Well, I suppose that was a journey in itself. We looked at, I'm sure, 6 or 7 locations. We actually did 2 or 3 feasibility studies on different locations. One of them at one stage was the market in the town here, and we've done a fair bit of work on that in terms of a whole plan in terms of using it then to revitalise the town centre and stuff. When it was fairly imaginative stuff at that time. Just proved a bit too beyond us in terms of the whole sort of and the whole machinations of inside the council, but also us, in finance wise. So when this project then came about, or how this project really came about, was that this place became derelict and unused in the middle of the town. And I suppose even at that time this really wasn't in the middle of the town, it was almost still slightly peripheral. Ballybot, as I was saying earlier on, always had a sort of distinct field itself, and I suppose that's the strength that we're now going to look in the future to build on. But at that time it was sort of semi-peripheral and wasn't being taken up by the private sector. The interesting twist in the whole thing was that we had been doing a bit of work on enterprise and community business stuff, and there was a guy there who was, in fact he was one of the McCann Bakeries people, family, and he had a contact with the guy who owned this, so you know how these things work in the private sector. But it was the Holiday and Fisher group owned this. So they then took benevolently to the idea that we would develop this as a community resource, and actually they showed a fair bit of imagination in saying, look, we'll actually hold on to this for as long as it takes for you to get finance in place.
So there was almost a promise there not to dispose.
Yes.
Before you had got your act together.
That's right. And I suppose in the whole talk around transfer of community assets or transfer of assets to communities, that's interesting in the sense that they were prepared to do the bigger thing and let the community have its head in terms of getting hold of the asset. So that's an interesting thing, because you're getting goodwill not just from public sector and the public sector transferring assets, but that's actually an example of where the private sector actually were in benevolent mode. So that was interesting.
Did that surprise people?
It probably did, because it was such a big project. Yeah, it probably did, and that people were prepared to hold out like that, and also the sort of business network of supporting the whole idea. So that probably did a bit, but the aspect that didn't surprise us was just how difficult it was then actually to get the thing going.
Could you talk us through some of those difficulties, sort of one by one?
Yeah, well, I think one by one was that the committee had to take a very bold decision of actually taking on the responsibility of it, and that's back to the whole debate and one of the problems with the whole community asset stuff, which is around liabilities and what people have to take on in terms of a worrisome burden about are they going to be able to handle this. So people had to sign their names and sign on the dotted line their houses, etc., to to actually underpin this.
What do you think convinced people to take such a serious commitment?
Well, I think those people who were there at that time were very serious community people. You know, there weren't people who'd been on the committee for a year or two, and I'm not suggesting that that is you know, an indication, but they'd been in this for a long graft, and a lot of them were experienced people. So I think they saw that as a staff at that time we were committed and we were involved, and also I think they were taking a lot of steer from us, and we probably did give it a bit of a better spin in terms of, you know, what might be in front of us. And I suppose, to be honest, we were probably a bit naive in terms of, you know, thinking that funders would line up to, you know, to sort out the community asset in Newry. Now that eventually happened, but it, you know, there was a nervous period for a year, 18 months, 2 years where things were in the doldrums, and it was getting very hard to move things. And I think again the council were key in moving the thing, but that didn't just happen overnight, and it took a period of time. Probably it took a bit of period of time locally for people to get in their heads that this was actually going to happen. And I think that's a big key thing is around the whole community confidence thing, is that people, you know, need to be reassured that this is not, you know, pie in the sky stuff, and that people are going to actually pull this down to the ground and do it, you know.
Now, I mean, this is you've got quite a lot of organisations in behind you all. Presumably that took a fair amount of work to pull that all together behind this project. Well,
somewhere if I could find it, I still have the document around the very first proposal here, and the first proposal for this project here was about 3 pages of a basic proposal and a list of who might get involved with this, and some of that was, you know, some of that was definitely people who were, and some of it was by sleight of hand that we were indicating that they would, you know, so that's part of the process obviously. So it probably developed like everything from that, but it was just a simple basic idea. It wasn't too convoluted at the time, and people sort of bought into it, you know.
And what sort of things now happen here now that the thing's established?
So, well, I suppose we have 2 things here, I suppose 2 or 3. I suppose the first thing is that in terms of doing the building up, the building was done very sensitively in terms of, you know, the top floor of the building actually had been burnt down. So my first encounter with this building was walking over the top of it when it was capped with a big type of, you know, tar roof. But that was just because the top building had to be demolished, because it was top of the building had to be demolished because it was in dangerous state. So I think 2 things is we managed to rebuild that and rebuild it with very similar materials to the original building. It gave us more space, and the building looked really good in terms of, you know, its place in the town. And we then had, you know, like...
You felt that was important?
I think it's important in the sense that people could see that that what we were doing was a sort of like, you know, continuance of the sort of community ethos, and this place had been a focal point for work for people. So there was that feeling, there was a community memory there that we were tapping into. So I think that all of those things go to, you know, to create a project and to create it in the mind of people.
Well, nearly around about 20 years into the project now, yeah. What sort of advice would you give to anybody else who's considering transferring local assets to the community?
Well, I suppose our experience first was that we did this the hard road the first time around, which was, you know, engagement with the private sector, which was mortgaging a considerable part of it to make it happen. And that is a hard road to go down in terms of, you know, the whole sustainability and income generation. And in times like this now, where the whole economic squeeze is coming on, that's not to be underestimated in terms of, you know, the pressure it puts on people. We also then have had a second bite of the cherry with the development of the new building on Storris, and it's been a lot easier experience because it's been almost 100% funded. So that's a very nice thing. So one thing has built on the other. But the main advice to people is to have a go at it, you know, is actually to take your confidence and your you know, your...
And not be too disheartened if it doesn't work the first time.
Absolutely.